Hi.
Hello again. Ray Franz, page 704 of In Search of Christian Freedom. Ray is determining, in his own mind anyway, from his perspective, what the options are for people who have left the Watchtower. Is the thing that he sees as normal, i.e. some people doing a pendulum swing over to what he terms orthodoxy. For us, that's not been normal in our own experience, nor in the experience of others who've left the Watchtower that we know of, but maybe for Ray it was. And so he handles it this way. Just as we can quickly solve the problem of association by joining some denomination, we can quickly solve the problem of what to believe by adopting what is called orthodoxy. The term itself is a fine one, coming from the Greek words ortho and doxa, meaning simply right teaching. Actually, it has come to stand for a set of beliefs that have been defined and established as a result of the various councils held in earlier centuries. Some of those beliefs are simply restatements of Scripture and are obviously right teaching. Others are the result of interpretation, argumentation, and debate, and have been pronounced orthodox by men in authority. As one source therefore puts it, quote, Orthodox Christianity is something purely descriptive, referring simply to the majority opinion. And that quote is from Bruce Shelley, Dr. Bruce Shelley, professor of church history at Denver Seminary, in a book called Church History in Plain Language. Ray goes on, the majority opinion came from the vote of men who constituted what may be properly called governing bodies of the past.
My own intimate experience with a religious governing body gives me little cause to feel that the majority vote of religious leaders forming a governing body of the past necessarily gives any genuine strength for the acceptance of a certain belief. In my previous religious life, I found that persons all too often believed because the organization had spoken. I see no progress or improvement in now believing because orthodoxy has spoken through the same medium of religious authority. Many today who are orthodox have become such by the same process of indoctrination and intellectual intimidation, and with the same lack of independent thought and critical analysis of argumentation that characterize so many within the Watchtower movement. The mere fact that a belief has been long held or gained wide acceptance in the past may make it traditional, but does not of itself make it right.
Then he links Mark chapter 7, verses 1 to 8, a familiar passage if you're a Jehovah's Witness. So this is the one about the traditions of men, so let's read it straight from the New World Translation. Mark 7, 1 to 8.
Now the Pharisees and some of the scribes that had come from Jerusalem gathered about him. And when they saw some of his disciples eat their meals with defiled hands, that is, unwashed ones, for the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands up to the elbow, holding fast the tradition of the men of former times. And when back from the market, they do not eat unless they cleanse themselves by sprinkling. And there are many other traditions that they have received to hold fast, baptism of cups and pitchers and copper vessels. So these Pharisees and scribes asked him, why is it your disciples do not conduct themselves according to the tradition of the men of former times, but they take their meal with defiled hands? He said to them, Isaiah aptly prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far removed from me. It is in vain that they keep worshiping me, because they teach as doctrines commands of men. Letting go the commandment of God, you hold fast the tradition of men.
Well, there's several issues here that I beg to differ with Ray upon, because his analysis, it seems to me, is inadequate in terms of comparing the governing body of the Watchtower with the governing bodies of Christendom. First of all, the governing body of the Watchtower is a recent invention. It's only been around for about 50 years at the most, whereas the governing bodies of Christendom have been around for 1500. So in effect, you've got dozens and dozens of governing bodies, all comparing with other governing bodies. 1500 years of tradition is hard to sustain, let alone to win a consensus. Yet we have a consensus in Christendom, and therefore there's no room for new light. And in terms of the Watchtower governing body, of course, many who leave because there's new light within 50 years of the old light. But
even his description of the way the governing body works in other portions of this book and his previous book, show you that they did not spend their time reading scripture and analyzing it and looking at the language and coming to understanding. No, they just rubber stamped the previous decision that the Watchtower made. So he describes the way the governing body works very well. But I don't think you can say, I think he's assuming that that's the way everyone's governing body works. And that's the way the church would do it.
Well,
and has always done it.
Even if it were true that that's the way other governing bodies do it, there's a big difference between the one and the other, i.e. the governing bodies of the denominations of Christendom, not to mention the ones that made the council decisions many centuries ago. But the governing bodies as they exist in the denominations today, first, they don't have the power that the Watchtower governing body has to legislate. And second, they're scholars. They are trained men, trained at seminaries. And the higher up you go in the hierarchy of the denominations, generally the better trained you are. That's not true of the Watchtower governing body. They're not educated men. As we've said in several other videos, there's a ceiling, a spiritual and intellectual ceiling in the cults that's not there in Christendom.
Even the number of meetings, if you compare that, the 7 councils are not done. They're done over a real long span of time, right?
500 years.
And different groups of men. Whereas with the Watchtower, the governing body is meeting weekly.
Yeah.
And making decisions. And like you said, over just 50 years, they could make lots and lots of changes in the teaching, in the doctrine.
Whereas in, let's say, the Presbyterian or the Baptist or the Anglican churches, first of all, those denominations have been around only 400 or 500 years, and that makes it different in one sense, in the chronological sense. But the creeds of the church, let's say the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, were finalized by councils 1,000 years before that.
Yeah.
And
accepted by these different denominations.
Well, when the new denominations form, let's say the Baptists and the Presbyterians, they don't have the authority to overthrow the teachings of the universal church of 1,000 years.
Yeah.
But what they do have the power to do in their governing bodies is to set forms, new forms, let's say on baptism, church structure, the sacraments, missions.
Music.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Styles of worship. What's appropriate, what isn't appropriate. Some people, think it's important that you stand during prayers or kneel during prayers
or sing music without musical instruments.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of those kinds of nuanced things.
But they don't have the power to overthrow the universal church's creeds that go back to the 7 councils of before 1000 AD. And that makes it altogether different than the comparison being made here. So another thing I would object to is the parallel with the Pharisees and the Scribes, the traditions text that we use here, Mark 7. Well, the Pharisees were the new kids on the block. They were more like the sects or the cults than they are like the traditions of, let's say, the Sadducees. The Sadducees, because they represent the priestly class, they can claim much older ancestry than the Pharisees. The Pharisees weren't even clergymen. They were lawyers, but scribes and Pharisees were doctors of the law. They were highly educated, but on the other hand, they studied their stuff in the schools, and they didn't have specific authority to start changing Judaism.
Yeah, and didn't you say too that they put the bulk of their stress on the Moses writings, right?
So the Sadducees could claim ancestry going all the way to the Aaronic priesthood, so back to Moses.
And so they stress those books, whereas I guess the
law,
Pharisees
that is, yeah,
would be more inclined to be including all of the books, like so the prophets and the.
So they were the liberals. They would include more books than the Sadducees would in their canon.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, because they were new kids on the block, they had the ear of the people. They were the modernists who adopted some Greek ideas, and for that reason the Pharisees were far more popular than the religious establishment, the Sadducees.
So when I was a witness, I did not. First of all, scribes and Pharisees, I just interchanged those. I didn't know there was a difference really, other than the one thing, the joke about they don't believe in the resurrection. So that's why they're Sadducee. You know, I knew that, but I didn't know to what extent, and I didn't know about canons.
Yeah.
That was all new to me when I left the witnesses. I didn't know how the Bible came to me, how I had these particular books in the New Testament, these particular books in the Old Testament, who did it, how it was done. I didn't know any of that.
Well, that does make a big difference, the historical dimension. The Pharisees had only been around for maybe 150 to 200 years. In that sense, they're more like the cults. And the traditions they have, they're not what is being preached in the synagogue. They have rabbinic schools, like seminaries, where rabbinic students heard all these traditions. But in the synagogue, you've got the law being read. You've got the prophets being read. And the Sadducees made that the priority of Judaism was the reading of the law, and the prophets were allowed, but the law got the precedence, and the law got the primary emphasis in the synagogues of Judaism right across the world.
So
This
all
was
the
enforced.
people were hearing the word of God regularly.
So I don't think the parallel holds up at all, because if you want to make a parallel, it would be that the traditions of men came in with the orthodoxy of the Pharisees, who were late on the scene.
And I don't know if it's because of leaving the witnesses, but my experience too was when we left, it was a long time before I would even enter a church. And then when I did go into the church, I didn't just accept things. I'd been there, done that, wasn't going to do that again. So I was very cautious, and I think I wouldn't have just accepted what they'd say.
Orthodoxy.
Oh, this is orthodox.
Yeah.
I would still want to know why you believe it, and how you came to this understanding, and that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And the people that we've met that have left the witnesses, most of them seem to be lost, don't know what to believe. So I don't think people are too quick to just accept things when they go to church.
All right. Well, there's a lot more to say about this, and we'll probably get the opportunity to say it later in the chapter.
Yeah.
Two links we're going to put on your screen. One is to unity versus Watchtower uniformity, and that's a discussion of the Apostles' Creed, which, as far as we know, is the oldest of the major creeds of Christendom, going back at least 1,500 years. And the other one is on the gospel. The difference between the denominations and the cults is the gospel that saves. And we've done a video on 1 Corinthians 15 where we discuss that more thoroughly. So check that one out too. And Ray goes on analyzing the difference between orthodoxy as it's found in the church and what he considers to be a more balanced form of Christianity. So next time he gets into specific teachings of orthodoxy that he still disagrees with, such as the immortality of the soul.
Okay.